Welcome to the Fungi Finders. My name is Jana. I'm your host, Jana Harris, and I will lead you today on a journey to look for spring mushrooms. But before we do that, before we show you some spring mushrooms that you might see now in your yards or gardens or on your walk, I would like to talk about how to best ID mushrooms and what to look for when you're IDing mushrooms. So these are little steps that I like everyone to follow and keep in mind when you're IDing mushrooms. First of all, always look at the top of the cap of the mushroom. If you want to take a picture, that's wonderful. I highly recommend that. And always take a picture of a close-up. Don't take a picture from high up, standing up, because that's very hard to ID. So take a close-up picture of the top of the cap of the mushroom. You can take a picture from the side as well. That might be helpful. Another very important thing is to look at the underside of the cap. Lots of mushrooms might look the same from the top when you look at them, but then when you flip them over, the underside or the underskirt, as we call it in myco world, will look very different for different mushrooms. Some of the examples of what you can see on the underside of the mushroom, as in this picture that we have, is on the right side we have the gills that you might have seen on store-bought mushrooms like the portobello or button cap mushroom. And the gills are the thin blades that you see on the underside. They can be very tightly spaced, they can be widely spaced, they can range in sizes, they can be attached to the stem of the mushroom or the stipe, they can be detached from it, and all this information will be found or can be found in the field guides that you will get for the mushrooms. Very detailed information about the underside and what the gills look like. Another type of underside that you can see would be a teeth, which is on the left picture where you see the orange mushroom. The bottom of that one has little spikes or little teeth, as we call it, and those are actually tubes that are filled with the spores, and that's where the spores are released. On most mushrooms on the underside, that's where you find the spores. That's how they are released. The picture is showing us hedgehog mushroom. It's a great edible, my favorite edible. And on the right side, we have a mushroom called bluet, which is a great edible as well. It's a late fall mushroom, but I would not recommend that to the beginners because it does have a poisonous lookalike called Cortinarius. So don't forget about the top of the cap, the underside of the cap. Sometimes when you're IDing mushrooms, it's good to take a cross section of the mushroom, just slice the mushroom completely halfway and see what happens, because some mushrooms, especially in the bolete family, will change a color of the flesh or the spores, or just the stem will change a color once they're exposed to the oxygen. And that information again will be listed in your field guides that you have. We also call it bruising. So if you're looking for the information in your field guide, look for something called bruising. Another thing to think about when you're collecting or IDing mushrooms, especially when you're learning about them, would be to try to collect the whole mushroom, the whole body. Don't just slice the top off and take it home to study it. It might make it much harder for you to ID the mushroom. You see that it's good to collect mushroom also in different stages of life, because some mushrooms look differently when they're little ones, when they're young, and then they change their appearance. When they mature, they change the color of their gills. The picture that we have here is 3 different stages of mushroom agaricus, which is also called pink bottom, and you can see the mature mushrooms have changed the color from the pink to actually dark pink or dark brown color. One more thing, or 2 more things to think about when you're IDing mushrooms is, where did you find the mushroom? East Coast, West Coast, Canada, South America, Europe. Think about that. But also think about where the mushroom was growing when you found it. Was it growing on the wood? Was it growing out of the stump? Was it growing out of the mulch or maybe some leaf litter that you have in the yard or in the woods? Was it growing terrestrially, which means on the ground? It can be scattered, it can be growing in clusters. All this information is very important, because some mushrooms will only grow on the wood, some will grow only on the ground. And that can be very important, again, when you're IDing things. The last thing I want to talk about in this section is a trick to ID mushrooms. It's not a trick, but it's a way to ID a mushroom, would be to make a spore print. Here is the little drawing, very simple drawing from Gary Linkoff's book that I really like, and I like the picture. It explains how to make a spore print. So as you see, you take a cap of a mushroom, you slice it off, any mushroom, even the big polypores that you find in the woods or other ones. So you take a cap of a mushroom, you set it down on a paper with whatever gills or underside facing down, and then you cover it with a bowl and you let it sit undisturbed for at least 5 or 6 hours. You come back, you lift up the bowl, you lift up the mushroom, and you will see what you see on the screen. All the spores from the mushroom will drop down on a paper or aluminum or whatever you have the mushroom sitting on, and you will see the color of them. And this information about the color of the mushroom that you have, about the color of their spore print, will be in the field guide. And lots of times, especially when you're learning about the mushrooms, it's great to know what color is the spore print from the mushroom that you found, because sometimes the spore print is the only way how to tell if the mushroom is edible or poisonous or toxic or deadly. So I think it's very important. Also, it's fun. You can do this with the kids. I like to make a spore print on aluminum foil. You can also use a glass. If you have like an old glass picture that has broken, if you have a pane of glass or maybe a glass plate, you could do that on a glass plate. And some mushrooms will have different colored spore prints. Spore prints can range from the white, pale color, green, brown, black, also purple color, rusty color. So I think it's important to know when you're studying them to know this fact. Here is the part when we talk about the spring mushrooms. You might see either on your walk some spring mushrooms popping up, or some people are lucky and they have them right in their yard, or some of these mushrooms actually can be planted and added to your yard. Like this first group that we have right in front of us, it's called wine cap. Some people call it garden giant because these mushrooms grow quite big. They can be around 8 inches in diameter before the mushroom turns up flat, right? The scientific name for the wine cap mushroom is Stropharia rugosa annulata. The name comes from the color of the wine cap. It's kind of a burgundy color mushroom when it's little baby, and then as it grows bigger, I think the color kind of fades. Also, if the mushrooms stay in the sun, the color will fade and the top will kind of crack. So these are the wine caps that you can see in the wild, usually in some areas where there's mulch. I would say maybe on the pathways or somewhere in the woods. I found a bunch of them in the wild, but lots of people, as I said, add them to their yard. I do want to talk about more of the appearance of this mushroom. As you can see in the picture, it has a quite white stem or the stipe. It gets tough with the age, so the mature mushrooms have a quite tough stem. It's very stringy and rigid. And the gills on the bottom of these mushrooms are quite crowded. And those gills should be chocolate brown color. They start in the young mushrooms as a pale gray color, and they slowly turn very dark purple. And also the spore print will be the same color. It's a purple dark brown spore print. The mushroom flesh is very firm, and for the edibility of these mushrooms, we recommend the people in the micro world like to eat them when they're still closed off buttons. Once they start turning flat, the caps, they're kind of tough. So I collect them when they're quite young, and I added them to my garden. I purchased some inoculated sawdust, which had the wine cap mycelium already mixed into the sawdust. And I layered the mulch in my yard, and then I layered the layer of sawdust, which had the wine caps in them, and then I did a layer of mulch again, and I watered it well, and in a few months you can get mushrooms like these in your yard, and they're great edibles. Another thing I want to mention is that these mushrooms, as you might see in the picture, do have a ring, which is the leftover from the veil that was on the mushroom. And it's kind of a wrinkled ring. They're also kind of acidic, so if you cook them ever, I would recommend using them in maybe like a tomato or wine sauce. And the edibility, I know some people don't like them, but I believe that the wine caps are really tasty. It's a great edible, although if you find something like this in the woods, of course, double check with your local expert on mushrooms, me or someone from the mycological club or some other people. They have experience with looking for the wild mushrooms, always double check what you have before you're consuming it. Wine cap is definitely native to our area. You can find it here in North Shore area or also in Europe, I believe so. If you see them anywhere in the yard, send us a picture and we can help you ID them if you're interested in them. Here are some harvested wine caps that we added to our yard. As you see them growing out of the mulch, you can get quite a lot of them. We had like every day around 2 pounds of fresh wine caps, and also my friend with the huge basket of harvested wine caps from one of our Boston Mycological member yards. There's Isabella and her friend Patty, I believe, and our son with the wine caps that we have planted and added to our garden. I will be talking about very desired mushrooms that lots of people might be looking for around here on the North Shore, but also all around Massachusetts and anywhere in the United States. These are very tricky to find. They're called morel mushrooms, and they're Morchella species, and I do want to talk about how to ID morel mushrooms that are great spring mushrooms that should be out right now. They grow maybe starting in early May all the way through the end of the May. It has ridges on the cap. The cap is usually cup-shaped. It can be anywhere between 2 and 11 centimeters tall, and the cap can be up to 6 centimeters wide, so they can get pretty big. The very important ID for these morel mushrooms is when you slice one morel open, as you see in the picture, the whole entire of the mushroom inside the stem should be hollow. And another thing with the morels is that you should look at the cap that is connected at the base of the stem. Morels have pits and ridges. Most of the ones that we find here are usually blonde morels, which means they have the pale or yellow ridges that don't really change the color. They kind of look like I would say a little beehive, the shapes they are. Morels do grow on the side of the river, very closely located to the apple trees, cottonwoods, or ash trees. So if you know an area where there is maybe lots of old apple trees, or crab apple trees or ash trees, you can maybe go look there in a spring. Especially if it's by the water, you could go and look for the morels. They do grow alone usually. They will grow in the bigger groups, but it's always just one morel on the ground, and then further away you can find another one. And they do always grow out of the ground. As I said, their stem is hollow, and their spore print will be creamy yellow or whitish color. I think I have not forgotten anything to say about the morels, but I do want to show you more pictures of the morels. So here are some more morels that we found locally. I do want to say that if you want to look for wild morels, it might be very hard for you to find them on the North Shore, in the Ipswich area or wider North Shore area. Most of the times, people that live around here will find them in their mulch. If you have a mulch that's been imported from the West Coast to the East Coast, the morel mycelium is already in the mulch that people are buying and spreading in their yards or elsewhere. So the morels might get transplanted with the mulch into your yard, and then you're very lucky, and you might be very lucky as some people, and you will find the morels directly growing in your yard. We did find one morel right next to the ducky in a Long Hill property, and then the huge tray in the middle is morel haul that we got from one of the yards up in Topsfield. And as you can see in the pictures, there's lots of them. They're not very big, but we found a lot, and all of them have the hollow stem. I do also want to mention that you might have a question about where are the spores in morel mushrooms. So the spores are in those individual cups that you see, and morel is also part of the cup fungi family. Here are some that we harvested at the Long Hill Children's Garden, and then we traveled all the way out to Connecticut, I believe, or Western Massachusetts, again with my friend from Boston Mycological Club, Isabella, and we found 2 morels that day. It was a long trip, but we were very happy. One of them was big, and one of them was quite small. Morels are very, very delicious. You can buy them in a store. They sell them as dehydrated mushrooms, When you find them, you can dehydrate them. They keep very well once they're dehydrated. And so if you never find any in the woods, you can go to the local store maybe and find some there. But once you dehydrate them, they're delicious. Some people also like to stuff them with like a cheese and maybe garlic or some other things, fillings, and then they bake them and roast them. So that's another great way to use them. I would like to talk about these wonderful, great morels that have been found actually this week by a sister of one of our members in the Boston Mycological Club. The lady who found them, or she found them with someone else maybe, was Sue Timberland, and she let us to use this picture. As you can see, some of the morels can get really, really big, and I think you're very lucky if you find a huge morels like this that you can wash and dry in your dish rack, I would say. Sometimes people, when they're washing and drying the morels, use actual water, but I think you can just dust them off if there's any dirt on them. I know that the caps are better, they have a better texture. It's not a stuff for the consumption. And the caps sometimes, the stems sometimes are used for dehydration, and then people grind them up later on and just use them as an added flavoring to their dishes. I also want to mention a very important thing about the morels. Morels need to be cooked very well prior to consuming, because they are actually toxic if you don't cook them enough. So if you're cooking anything with them, first of all, double check that what you have is a morel, that it has a hollow inside, and that it's actually a morel. And then even if you know that it's a morel, they still should be cooked very well, baked, roasted, whatever you do with them. Another fun mushroom I wanted to mention that might be unknown to lots of people is called train wrecker. And I think the name says it all, and I will say in a minute why. The scientific name is Neolentinus lapidus, and it's an early spring mushroom. I think I found this one last year around May 5th, and it's kind of a sign of other mushrooms to come. This is a mushroom in a group, Agaricus mushrooms, and this one grows on the dead wood or conifer stumps, but also grows on the railroad ties, and that's where the name train wrecker comes from, because it destroys the railroad ties, obviously, and it can overtake them completely, and then they have to swap them and exchange them, of course, to keep the trains safe. It can also grow on a lumber or fence wood. This mushroom has a very tough flesh, and how you would ID the mushroom is if you look at the cap that you can see in the picture. As we said, look at the cap of the mushroom, you will see the scales, the brown scales in the middle of it. And then another ID would be on the bottom, very scaly stem or stipe that you can see as the scales. And the gills on the underside of these mushrooms are jagged, I would say, and kind of soft. So that's another ID feature for the train wrecker. The odor of this mushroom should be kind of a sweet anise-like, and the taste is not very special. But some people, I think in Europe, eat this mushroom. So I never tried it personally. If you see anything that looks like this in the early spring, it's worth checking it out. Just seeing it, looking at the mushroom, you can make a spore print. The spore print should be white from this mushroom. And as I said, the flesh should be white, and the stem should be dull yellow color. One more spring mushrooms that you might see around this time of the year, it's called dryad saddle, or some people call it peasant's back. I guess because it looks like a saddle. It can grow very big, as the size of the saddle, I would say. The scientific name is Cereoporus squamosus, and this is one of the polypore mushrooms that grows on a hardwood stump. It can grow anywhere from 5 centimeters in the width up to 30 centimeters, so it can be quite big, and it's usually around 1 to 4 centimeters thick. You will know it by this very distinctive scaly top, grows on the trees as is a polypore. The base that you see lovely in this picture has a velvety kind of a texture, and these polypores can be found especially on a silver maple or box elder tree. And this mushroom, if you would do spore print, which you can do on the polypores as well, the spore print should be white. This mushroom is kind of fun to find in the spring because it smells as fresh cucumbers or watermelon rind, and lots of people do pickle this mushroom if they find it fresh in the spring. They slice it up thinly and then they treat it as you would treat cucumbers, right, for pickling. It has a strong kind of a fresh taste, so I think the young ones, the young specimens, I usually use them in stir fry or some kind of a dish like that. Thank you for watching another episode of Fungi Finders, which was all about the spring mushrooms. If you go out and you see any mushrooms in the yard, even anything else than from what we talked about, feel free to send us an email with some pictures. We can ID your mushrooms. We can feature them on our show. If you have any questions, let us know. We will be making a special trip in the next episode to the Essex County Mushroom Farm up in Boxford. And Mark, who runs the farm, will show us his farm setup. He will talk about how he started with the mushrooms. He delivers mushrooms to local farmers markets, restaurants. You can also get a mushroom share from him, so you can pick up fresh mushrooms from him every so often. And you can also buy a home kits, which is like a sawdust block that you can grow mushrooms from at home. So I hope you join us next time, and we will see you soon again on Fungi Finders. Have a great day.